and good afternoon, everyone. What I'm doing today is reconvening the meeting that was adjourned yesterday. Unfortunately, the way the agenda was written is that it picked up an automatic item on the agenda, which happens when we've got hearings panels, and so sorry everyone, but there won't be an election of a chairperson for the meeting today. You're stuck with me. I know that there were several of you who were looking forward to it, but it is not to be. So the first item on the agenda is apologies, and apologies have been received from councillors Chu, Goff and Major. Would someone like to move that those apologies be accepted? Aaron Kewen seconded Tim Scandrett. I shall put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That is carried. There are no declarations of interest recorded, and the Ōtautahi Christchurch Climate Change Strategy Hearings Panel staff report is now on the agenda and is now on the it has been received. So staff have prepared a report and it will be considered alongside all of the submissions received on the draft strategy after the hearings have been concluded. So, and now we will move on to the first item is item 5, volumes of submissions. The first recommendation is that we accept the written submissions, including any late submissions received on the draft climate change strategy. Sarah, would you like to move that? And seconded by Jake. I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That is carried. And now we move on to the hearing of submissions, some of whom we've already heard in relation to the specific items that have been included in amongst the long-term plan, which is why we simply adjourned yesterday's meeting. So now I'll invite each of the community boards to come forward, and the first one is Waipapa Papanui Innis Community Board.
Kia ora koutou, thank you for having us along to speak to our submission today. I've got Simon Britton, our deputy, with me today. Our Waipapa Papanui Innis Community Board is pleased to see the council stepping up and making a commitment to taking action on climate change. We are generally supportive of the draft strategy, especially the way it breaks such a significant issue down into manageable, understandable steps, making it less overwhelming and more likely to encourage people to participate and support it. We are encouraged by the leadership role that council is prepared to take through this draft strategy and the partnerships which are talked about throughout the document. One area this strong council leadership needs to come through in is reducing council's carbon emissions. We note that the target of 2030 for council to achieve net carbon neutrality in its operations does not seem all that ambitious, especially when other major corporations around the country are already achieving carbon neutral status. We would encourage you to bring this target forward. Our board supports the focus on a communications and behaviour change program in Programme 1 of the draft strategy, but believe this public education should be further emphasised throughout the strategy. Council needs to be bringing our communities along with it as we deal with climate change, and education is the key to getting people on board with this. With regards to Programme 7, Low Emissions Transport System, our board is extremely supportive of the focus areas outlined in the draft strategy, especially the increased education and incentivising of sustainable transport use. Finally, while we appreciate the need for this strategy to be reasonably short, concise and simple, our board would like to see more detail on how the strategy will be implemented, including the associated risks and challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very sharp and to the point submission. So, but what that has done is it has left a lot of time for questions. So I'm sure that councillors have got questions for the community board.
Okay.
Jimmy Chen.
Yeah. Particularly you mentioned council take the lead and also part of the city's community. Can you explain to what kind of community, the scope of area, yes.
It's the community as a whole. We realise there's a lot of work going on with programs for schools and that sort of thing. There's that education part of it, but it's the wider community as well. And yeah, as I said, it's that education and bringing people along the journey with us. Yeah, do you have anything to add to that?
Thank you.
I've got James Daniels and then Sarah Templeton.
Kia ora, Emma, Simon. You mentioned low emissions transport. I don't think it's in your written submission.
Is it not? Okay.
No.
Well, it's sort of, we support the general thing. We just wanted to highlight that. And,
yeah. So what do you mean by that? Can you articulate that a little more? What you're
it's
supporting?
the giving people the options of getting out of cars, or incentivising the use of electric vehicles and public transport. And I mean, we're well on the way with what's been going on in some areas of that, the likes of the cycleways and that sort of thing. But again, it's that public education. Yeah. Did you want to add anything to that?
Oh, just to note that in the document itself, it has a figure of 54% of the district's greenhouse gas emissions are from the transport sector. So it's clearly a large area that's going to need to have some shifts and change over this, through this strategy.
Yeah. So you mentioned cycleways at one stage there. So does that your low emissions transport options include the lowest emission of cycling? And so what do you want to see us do more of? Leading question, I admit.
You're probably asking us in more depth than we've discussed it as a submissions committee. My response to that, though, would be to continue the work on programs such as the major cycle routes and also local cycle connections, and specifically around cycleways. And the content that's in there for that program 7 on low emissions transport system around walkable neighbourhoods, trips other than in single passenger vehicles and so on, is certainly consistent with the discussions we've had around a board table.
Okay, I yield.
Sarah?
Kia ora kōrua. The focus on council's emissions, which I completely get, so we've got the 2030 target currently for net neutral. Should the emphasis be on emissions reductions as the first port of call? So quite a few companies, you mentioned others have, other large organisations have gone net neutral, and much of that is by buying credits, if you like, and paying someone to plant trees. Are you looking for us to take that tack and be net neutral earlier, or to focus our energies and our spend on mitigating our emissions as well as our own tree planting rather than just offsetting? So that might be too detailed.
I think there's got to be balance.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've got to be realistic, but yeah.
Yeah, it's probably a level of detail that we don't see in the strategy as well, in terms of that. I guess that's the comment around asking for more detail.
Yeah.
Against that goal 1 of net zero, we see the end date of 2030 as the target, but there's no content in there or commentary around whether that's by offsetting, for example, by reduction and so on.
But the focus should be on emissions reduction first, and only offsetting where we need to, if you like.
That would be my personal view, but I don't know if we could speak for the board on that, given that we haven't discussed it.
Thanks.
Yes.
Melanie?
On the transport, we've got in the long-term plan about more PT lanes, with a plan that actually goes slightly beyond the long-term plan. Do you think we should be bringing this forward?
Where possible, yes.
And you can answer more to that as well, but I was also thinking that these climate change strategies that we really have to really develop, I think, to put the implementation plan together. Do you think that people would be prepared or to pay more basically for rates as what it's going to cost over the next few years? Do you think that's something the board might support or you might support?
Yeah, we haven't discussed that sort of detail.
Anne?
Kia ora. I'm interested in what you're saying about education and I think layperson's language in terms of communicating. And I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about that and have you thought about how that could look? Because I think it's a real challenge for us.
Yeah, it is a challenge, but I think this draft strategy is a good starting point. It does simplify it and it breaks it down and it makes it really understandable. So I think it's just building on that. Yeah.
Mike?
Thank you. When you look at the transport section of it, do you think there should be, because obviously we have our goals and we know that transport is a key contributor to the emissions, do you think we should have a clear pathway that shows that actually this is what we need to do to actually reach that goal we want to get to?
That's really it, that is what
Yeah,
we're talking about.
yeah.
More detail.
Having that plan.
Good. Oh, Tim.
Yeah, as we're going through our long-term plan at the same time, setting up for the next 10 years, and we've got these goals that we've put up, with regards to people saying, or some people saying, that we should be sticking to our core infrastructure, etc., those key things, do you believe that this is one of those key things? So when people talk about the three core, is this, say, the fourth one, or do you see it separate, or... It's just that our budgets are limited, as we all know, and there is going to be a cost to everything we do, and there's a bigger cost if we don't do things. So I'm just wondering where you sit with this.
Yeah, I believe it does need to be right up there.
Yep.
It's got to be a priority with everything council does now. It's putting this lens on it.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you. Well, look, that's everyone with the questions. So thank you very much for your presentation and for answering questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next is the Waitai Coastal Burwood Community Board, and we have Bibi Frail and Joe Zervos today.
Hello.
Hi.
Kia ora koutou katoa.
Kia ora. Welcome.
Don't have my usual offside when I'm here. I've got an improved model. I don't mind saying that, even if you can't see it. I'll get to say more this way.
I just need to warn you that this is live stream.
I know. I'm hoping he's watching. So we'll take the submission as read and just want to highlight a few key points that I want to really hammer home for you. We broadly support the 4 goals. Like the previous submitter, the strategy is simple to read, really well laid out, has lots of pictures, which is appreciated, good plain English. Our submission focused mostly on goal 2, which is we understand and are preparing for the ongoing impacts of climate change, because this goal is the one that impacts our coastal and riverside communities the most and the most directly. I just want to begin by saying that I watch with interest to see how some of these goals and programs will be funded. I've noted before here that the council is remiss if it passes resolutions with no funding to support what it wants done. It seems disingenuous to pass a resolution or establish a goal and then kind of go, great, that was awesome, done. And the program looks extremely expensive. Necessary but expensive. Highlighting a couple of the programs. Program 2, it's important that our communities are given regular, factual, plain English updates on our changing coastal environment. This is a key stressor in our environment, and if sea level is rising or change is happening, we want to hear about it. If there's monitoring happening, we want to know what that monitoring is. We want the outputs of that monitoring to be regularly provided to our communities so that they can understand the world that they're living in. Program 3, that we want our communities to be involved in planning and decision making about adaptation. Now, involvement is a spectrum from information. Some people only want information. Other people want full collaboration. They want a seat at the decision making table about what is going to be happening to them. It is signalled by our communities that we want to be involved in adaptation planning and decision making. We want council to walk alongside us in that, and walk alongside our communities. The key phrase here is with us, not to us. Program 7, the strategy notes that 54% of our greenhouse gas emissions are from public transport. So this, we need to, from transport, we need to address this. I like the idea of double duty that our Prime Minister talks about. Active transport has a double duty of providing social well-being and health outcomes, and also improving environmental impacts. So a focus on active transport, which is me using my feet or my legs to actually get around, is great. And I think the council is doing really well there. I would say that where are our cycleways? I live in East Christchurch. Where are my cycleways? Where are my walkways? I think it's being put in the too hard basket. It's in the plan, but it's a long way out. We need active transport as much as everybody else. Program 10, the commitment to sustainable food systems is great. I'm involved in a community garden. I think every community should have a sustainable production area, but it's slightly at odds in my view, in our view, with the development encroachment on land that is suitable for food production, and Preston's and Marshland Road is a great example of that. The increasing greenfields development reduces our green belt, and that is of a concern when we're going into a future where we'll have less arable land and more need for a sustainable food system where the food is grown next to the people who live in the place that they're eating it. And time for questions.
In terms of the question that you've raised, which is quite a legitimate one, which I've made a particular note of, is around this regular, factual, plain language information, re the coastal environment and engagement on the climate impacts in terms of adaptation. Have you, as a community board, looked at the implications of the legislative changes proposed for the RMA? Because there are 3 pieces of legislation, and the last one is climate change adaptation. And I'm just wondering whether that is something that needs to be wrapped into the work that's happening with the, what's your group called? The Coastal Hazards Group.
The Coastal Hazards Working Group.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've had a cursory look at it, but it would be good to have more information. I mean, I know that there are experts in this council that know a lot about what's going on, probably, and it would be good to have a conversation about that.
I think that the significance of the legislative change that's coming, and this is often the way with a number of the things that we're dealing with as a council, and we're dealing with that in the 3 waters environment, is that what central government is doing is just deeply intertwined with what we're doing. But we have, and you've quite rightly said, through your community board, a deep connection with your local coastal communities.
Yeah.
So we should be using that as the basis for getting the information out there and hearing back people's concerns and engaging.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In plain factual English that's easy to understand for our communities.
Plain language.
Yes.
Don't necessarily have to say English, because
plain
English may not be
language.
the first language.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mike.
Thanks for your submission. Just a couple of questions. You obviously spoke about how expensive some of this is. Do you think our reports, therefore, should also show the cost of inaction as well?
That's a really good point. If you can quantify that, absolutely. I mean, yes, it should.
And the other one, given the significant growth in the Preston's area, should we be looking actually at doing some type of cycling facility out to Preston's, that way, to encourage that mode shift?
Absolutely.
There have been quite a few requests come in to board, or board members, regarding trying to get a cycleway from the city which goes towards Bottle Lake Forest. So it links up with the recreation and the city, so you can use it for working and recreation. I thought it was quite a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, for us, the first cab off the rank is the city to sea pathway, which is great, but it's not a commuter route.
Yep.
It's a recreation route, and there are issues with using it as a commuter route if you're recreating on it, and it's not the fastest way into the city. So I think there is more needed.
Thank you.
In that joined up sense, the two high schools side by side must also have a significant need in that respect.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, Sarah.
Thanks so much. A couple of things there on the cycle paths sort of following on. You do have some off-road cycle paths at the moment, but they don't seem to be particularly well maintained.
They're not joined
well
up very well.
marked or
So they come and
joined
they
up.
go, and they're not well maintained, and some of them are on roads that aren't in very good condition to begin with.
Yeah.
It's
You do have some off-road ones as well, mostly NZTA kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And if there
It's
is,
piecemeal, I would say.
so, as well as maybe major cycle routes, ways of connecting those
Together.
ones that are already existing would be a good value kind of proposition, I think, as well.
And actually just cycling them and seeing where they drop off and have giant potholes and are not actually usable
Big
as a
tree
cycleway
roots
would
and
be
stuff.
great.
Yeah. And the other one is a discussion over the impacts of climate change. When we discuss those in the coastal environment, we tend to focus on the coast and sea level rise and erosion. But some of our submitters have also talked about the other impacts of climate change that will come, the economic, social, cultural, those kind of things, and not just the actual hazard of the sea. And are you keen to have some more work done in that space as well to see what the other impacts are going to be?
I would need to understand exactly what you mean to make sure we're thinking of the same thing, but things like displacement and lack of investment are two things that I can think of, that you have less surety about the future, then people are less likely to be in an area, and that's clearly the case in New Brighton. And the council's done a good job, I think, of building infrastructure to support the local community, but but commercial hasn't followed suit.
Yeah.
And that is a concern.
So getting some assessment done in that area as well,
I
and being
think
able to communicate that.
With the figures that come out as well, there's a lot of people that think it's going to happen tomorrow, and they don't realise that it's just happening gradually over the next 40, 100 years, and we can adapt as we go.
Yeah.
And they're getting quite worried and scared, and it affects them mentally.
And do you think that one of the things that, with that mental health and wellbeing thing, one of the things that has been proven to help in that space is that hopeful action?
Yes.
So not just focusing on the adaptation space because it's coming, but actually getting the community involved and educated and helping with the mitigation space to help it not be as bad as it might be
even
otherwise.
adaptation is a pathway, so it has stages and gateways, and being involved in that process is a hopeful process because it gives you a future.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Yeah.
That's lovely. Look, thank you very much for your presentation today and to responding to questions. Very helpful.
Thank you.
Next community board is Te Pātaka o Rakai Hautu, Banks Peninsula Community Board, Tory Pedden and Tyrone Fields. Thank you.
Which way are you going, Tori?
I was in the middle. Tēnā koutou, tēnei ahi ahi. Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, thank you for this opportunity to talk to you today. It is appreciated. We as a board are generally happy with the direction of this strategy. I am a little concerned that such an important consultation has been shoehorned, squeezed in between many other consultations that are running at the same time. Climate change and its impacts should not be an afterthought. It should be a forethought in everyone's mind. Thank you goes to staff for implementing the climate change impact considerations into every decision-making report we have. If we look at climate change through the lens of everything we do, it is a start in the right direction. With every plan, there needs to be finances put aside for this. Not only do we need dedicated staff time, but we also need to fund resources. Community groups are keen to help in any way they can, but there seems to be a block in the system from having trees available to plant and places and people to plant them. We seem to have a lot of the latter, but our groups are having trouble accessing, buying trees for where they need to go. We have land on Banks Peninsula that would benefit from being planted with native trees, but who should pay for this? Farmers are retiring some grazing in areas and returning them to native bush, but to purchase those trees come at a cost. You mentioned Hinawai in the strategy. We also have large amounts of council-owned land and reserves. I look forward to seeing these planted and returned back to what they once were. Transport. This will always be a tough sell on the peninsula, as we have no public transport apart from the bus to Littleton and the ferry to Diamond Harbour. Park and ride needs to be looked at for the outskirts of the city, perhaps in a form of an express bus or links to the cycle network. I am, however, aware of more people working from home since the COVID lockdown. This, in turn, may become more of an option with the increase of connectivity. My question back to you all are we doing enough and can we do more? Do you think I've missed much?
Well, that's about it. That's about it. Like, I support everything you say on that, obviously, Tori, and our board's very united on that. But like, I just want to sort of try and wrap it up, I suppose, by saying, you know, it is urgent. It's stated in the policy that the problem is urgent. So we talk about a balanced approach. The more we have a conversation about that, that actually undermines the urgency of the task at hand. But there is a requirement for coordination and incentivisation across the board for our city to be able to meet the the content of the policy and the interplay between those. You know, and that's all. But the way we plan our LTP, it's the way we represent our communities, all of that stuff. It all interlinks. On the peninsula, you know, like the risks for sea level rise, drought, wildfire, erosion, sedimentation, they are happening now. So we don't have time to sort of dilly-dally around, and we do need the infrastructure and services to combat those to a degree, wouldn't you say?
Yeah,
and as Tori says, like, we've got lots of volunteers, we've got a habitat to generate change, we've got landowners who are willing to support biodiversity, often without recognition for their efforts or incentives to do that. I mean, they're not opening up their land to dairy farming. And obviously mana whenua, whose kaupapa is kaitiakitanga of our environment. So I heard Bibi and Joe talk about opportunities to reduce food miles, so we've got that, you know, that on the peninsula. You know, there's a real asset there that, you know, we can really coordinate and utilise that asset in the city to be able to reach some of the some of the targets that we have as a city. You know, there are economic growth opportunities contained with that can be carbon neutral, so we don't have to lose out. You know, we don't need to cut things like biodiversity funds, and, you know, let's talk more about things like rail. Like, there's a port in our ward area that has goodness knows how many freight movements along roads every day, and yet, like, the biggest expenditure of this council was roads. Like, we're enabling that. And not talking about things like rail. So, you know, they're the things that are really at the heart of what we see at from the peninsula. That's probably me.
Pauline and James.
Yeah, thank you. Look, forgive me, I can't remember, in your LTP submission, did you make a comment on the Biodiversity Fund and our 5% proposed reduction?
I'm pretty sure we did.
Yeah, I think it was in the submission.
From memory?
Yeah, I think you probably would have.
Yes.
There's been quite a few people who've requested that we actually double that fund up to 400,000. What's your view on that? Do you think that would be a wise use of council funding?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the benefits outweigh the dollar value that goes into that.
Right, thank you.
I reiterate, we spend a lot of money on roads in this council, in this city.
James.
Kia ora kōrua. We've had a lot of presentations by farmers off Te Pātaka o Rākai Hautu, and I'm just wondering, you know, you're saying that you want us to provide access to reliable information and support for farmers to reduce their agricultural emissions. Do you have much face-to-face contact with those farmers that you're representing?
Yeah. I live in Wairua, and a lot of my neighbours are farmers of the big blocks, and so I know also one of them is on the Water Zone Committee, so therefore they're getting the assessments done of what they can change in the ways they're doing things. So yes, I'm speaking to a lot of the farmers almost daily. I mean, our children go to the same school, play netball together, that kind of thing. So we are having those conversations around the netball court. We are having those conversations on the ground.
Yeah, it was more along the lines of, are you getting good engagement from them as a community board on this and other matters?
From what we do have, I'm sure you'd know Pam Richardson does represent the farmers and does come along to the board quite regularly and gives us updates and more recently regarding the droughts and how they are affecting the farmers.
Well, a lot of our residents are farmers, so and we've got a very engaged ratepayer base, and so they do spend a lot of time face to face.
Okay, thanks.
Ian?
Thank you. Kia ora. And just building on that a little bit in terms of it feels there seemed to be a bit of an anger coming through from a lot of the submissions towards particularly the land drainage thing. And obviously farmers do a heck of a lot in terms of their own land and maintaining biodiversity and all that stuff. Have you thought about how we could strengthen the relationship between council and those rural folk that are doing that stuff to, I think you used the word, incentivise and perhaps reward?
I think what someone said before, rather than doing to, doing with. I think that comes down to a lot of it, and so they are changing. From what I understand, farmers are changing their practices, and I mean, how can we work together with those changes coming through? And quite often, okay, I'm not a farmer, however, I live in a rural environment. Hearing what they're doing to change, and hearing that they are, retiring grazing because they want to replant into native, but then again, having restrictions come on them that they've got to do this and plant up the streams and all the rest of it. It's become a contentious point, and so a lot of has happened to them, but also, I think it's just opening the communication a bit more and working with them rather than to them. We did discuss the land drainage from a board point of view, and I think it does need to be looked at a bit further. They're not against it. I don't think anybody's against it, but just the mechanism which it's being rolled out is just a bit, right.
Not many cities have residents who have 100-hectare blocks of land within the city, but it's often, as you say, do with rather than to. We often find that our residents, some of our residents are sort of here, pay some extra money because you've got quite a bit of land, but there's no, you're doing all this good work with biodiversity. How about some relief for that? They just do it because they care. But without incentivisation, imagine what they could do with incentivisation.
Yanni?
Just in your submission, you talk about the Whakaora Healthy Harbour. How do you see that program working at the moment, and do you think there's any need to review it or to put additional resource to support it?
Definitely additional resource. It is pretty well resourced, and it's a really good collaboration between the 4 stakeholder partners in it. I see it working very, very well. There's a very dedicated bunch of mostly volunteers doing a lot of good planting around Whakaropo, Littleton Harbour, and it's making a difference. We know that from the engagement that we've had from Ngāti Whiki. I would say we can always do more. How long is a piece of string? But Pauline talked about doubling the Biodiversity Fund. We need to do whatever we can within the bounds of our resource, and that's not monetary resource, just the resources that we have to be able to strengthen that type of program. It's a very well organised affair for sure.
Can I just ask a quick question before the zero comes up? This is in relation to the Programme 3 Proactive Climate Planning with Communities, which highlights the need to work with communities on Banks Peninsula to develop responses to localised climate issues such as threats to water supply, increased wildfire risk and erosion. This is the thing that worries me the most about Banks Peninsula, and I just wonder whether it's been called out sufficiently. It hasn't even warranted a next step for council. So is that something you'd like us to put a little bit more thought and effort into?
Yes, and there's also a bit of activation is actually happening on the ground in the communities. I know I'm working with community preparedness. I mean, there's no such thing as civil defence sort of thing anymore. I think people relied on what civil defence perhaps once were. However, having community having their own preparedness plans is something we are working on the ground. And so I can say yes, that got halted last year, obviously with everything else that got halted last year. However, that is in our thoughts with having all these fires, now drought and flooding and all that kind of different effects. It affects different valleys, settlements, quite a big range.
Yeah,
we are aware of that, and we are working on that, and we have actually had some local staff time being put into that as well.
good, because I
But
mean,
we also need the breathing space to have a more considered approach to things of this import. But we're actually, what Tori opened with is that we're actually being asked to do, 3 or 4 different processes all at once, which actually means that some things, we don't necessarily give as much focus on, or time and focus or energy on some things.
Some of them are joined up though.
Yep,
so
sure.
I always
Yep,
say
no,
that civil
totally.
defence is a way of working. It's not an organisational
No.
structure, and it is very community focused. In Europe, they call it civil protection. So I think we've got a bit of work to do in that space. But thank you very much for your submission this morning and this afternoon. Sorry, it's been a long day. I will, and thank you for responding to the questions. Thank you.
Got it. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you. Next is Waipuna, Hallsville, Hornby, Riccarton Community Board, Mike Mora. Sure, and welcome.
Good afternoon, land councillors, staff. It's a pleasure to be here today to join you, and thanks very much for the opportunity to present our submission on climate change strategy, the draft strategy. Think globally, act locally is sort of a key word I think that we need to look at here. And this submission was completed by the Board Submissions Committee under delegated authority by the Board. And I'm it today. The submission is that the Board recognise climate change as an immense challenge facing us at this time. It is a global issue with local impacts, and the Board strongly believe that the challenge will only be effectively met through collaborative partnerships in developing solutions. The Board supports the 4 goals set out in the strategy. Additionally, the Board anticipates the population of the southwest will increase as residents retreat from the east areas. Therefore, the Board asks that the Council turns its attention to these matters and plans ahead for the relevant infrastructure that will be required over a period of time when that happens. So it's just a heads up on that. The comments, the program building a foundation, partnerships and resourcing. And we know it's not just a local one, it's a government, environment, Canterbury, it's a partnership with all local authorities and regional councils and the government. So we know that the Christchurch City Council can't do it all on its own, and nobody's expecting the Christchurch City Council to do it on its own, but we've all got to work together in collaboration to tackle this very, very important issue. And it's not only Aotearoa and New Zealand, of course, it's the rest of the world. Lower emissions transport system. The Board believes that the options for effective and efficient mass transport systems for the Greater Christchurch also area need to be investigated. And the next item is, the next one is Program 10, Sustainable Food System. Other boards have raised this issue as well. But we ask that high quality versatile soils close to the city are protected. This may involve revisiting the district plan, and it may also be looking at the quarry activities as well on our highly productive soils close to the city. In conclusion, the Board requests that the Council considers matters set out in the above relation to the draft Ōtautahi Christchurch climate change strategy. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank, on behalf of our submissions committee, the staff who help us through our submissions and make it easy for us to pull it all together and come and present to you today in a helpful way. So, thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Now, councillors, Jimmy Chen.
The Hornby area is most business and industrial area. Regarding to the council climate change goal 1 is net zero emission Christchurch, and also Program 6, the Economic Transformation Innovation. Council would like to engage with Christchurch NZ and also CCC dealing with those spaces. But as a community board, you are the chair. Have you any idea to engage with those business? How to?
Well, transport's an issue because as I've presented to the council before, 25% of the workforce in Christchurch actually work in our ward. So that's an issue. A lot of transient coming in and out every day to work. So if we were to improve the options for reliable and economically sustainable transport in and out of the area, would certainly help meet the goal. Does that answer your question, brother?
Thank you.
Melanie.
Under Program 7, and you've talked about the mass transit, I don't actually, it doesn't even appear to be mentioned actually in our strategy. So do you think that needs to be another bullet point?
It's a low emission transport system, but I think mass transport systems do need to be looked into and considered. As I just said before, 25% of the workforce of the city in our board area, we need to make the toing and froing every day and night as efficient as we possibly can. So mass transit systems, and we did talk about in our submissions committee light rail options and rapid transport on rail. We'd be really, really encouraging looking at that. And just another point that I'd like to raise is with the closing down of TY Point aluminium smelter, a lot of that energy that's transmitted from that hydro scheme could be put into the electrification of rail, so that rail could be shifted around the country a lot more eco-friendly, in an eco-friendly way, and they would also reduce the workloads and the strain on our roading systems as well. So I think consideration should be given to seeing that Camelco's shut down. What's the best way of actually using that energy, especially when it's close to the source, like i.e. in the South Island?
Yanni?
Yeah, thank you. We've heard a lot of senators obviously raised concern about the closure of the Riccarton bus lounge.
Yes.
And I was just interested in whether your board had considered, for example, having more bus lounges like in places like Hornby.
Absolutely correct, and I think that's something that we certainly do not want to lose what we've got. We want that to be an example of giving a bit of comfort to the public transport users and a bit of confidence in the challenging weather, and for aged and infirm people to be able to shelter out of the elements and enjoy their public transport opportunities. So I think it's absolutely take that on board, Yanni, and think that that's something that should be given consideration. If you want people to use public transport, you've got to make it attractive and comfortable for them. Otherwise, they probably tend to hop in their car and go and park it in a multi-storey car park.
Thank you.
Very good. Look, thank you very much for your submission today, and thank you for responding to the questions that have been put to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
It's been
Mike.
enjoyable, thank you.
Thank you. Next is the Waimairo, Pendleton Waimairo Herwood Community Board, Bridget Williams.
It's all just blowing out. Oh, okay. No, nothing's to do.
Kia ora, welcome.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. So thank you so much, Councillors Mayor, for letting the board present on its submission for the draft Ōtautahi Christchurch climate change strategy. I'm going to take that the submission has been read, but we will just go through some of just a few key things that we'd like to emphasise. And one of those is the opportunity for the strategy to be aligned to the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. We see that this is a framework, it speaks an international language. We're now in the decade of action as we signed up to these goals in 2015, so it's definitely crunch time. And we think it would be a missed opportunity if we didn't use this strategy as an opportunity to align to the goals, in particular Sustainable Development Goal 13, which is climate action. Another thing that we really want to advocate for is transparency and measurement, and being a requirement with the strategy. And what we mean by that is just to make, you could come up with creative ways to take community on the journey and be a part and engaged in the process to see how we're tracking as a city towards the 4 goals. So whether that is some sort of active barometer online that people can check in and see how we're going, just to create a bit of engagement and an inspiration towards achieving our goal. In terms of goal number 3, one of the things that we wanted to raise was the recommendation for school education around climate change and sustainability, but coupling that with wellbeing and climate grief training as well. It's no surprise that the younger generation is going through massive amounts of anxiety and climate grief, feeling like these issues are on their shoulders. So if we're going to be introducing education programs, just something that the board would like to also see is that wellbeing component as well. With regards to Program 1, this is building the foundation, partnerships and resourcing. We noted that there's establishing a leadership group with key stakeholder representatives, and the board just asks that diversity and inclusion is incorporated into that, and we'd like to know who would be a part of that, and we would expect there to be all representatives from different sectors, so that being youth, mana whenua, age concern, just to keep that in mind for the stakeholder group. For Program 6, Economic Transportation and Innovation, the board acknowledges the importance of working with Christchurch NZ and Canterbury Employees Chamber of Commerce to deliver a series of events and activities. But we also ask that the council use this as an opportunity to engage with existing businesses and social enterprises that are already working, towards some of these initiatives as well. It's an opportunity to partner and see what else is out there, and perhaps profile some of these businesses as well that are doing great things already. And then with regards to Program 7, this is with the low emission transport incentive, something that the board has already been working on and we'd love to see roll out through the city is more bike incentives. So there's one that was set up with Jelly Park users, but perhaps it could be explored whether some of these incentives could be run through different or all council facilities, and maybe if there's an expectation that when you ride your bike you get a carrot, well, a metaphorical carrot, then it sort of starts to cotton on a bit and people will realise that actually I'll be rewarded for riding my bike. And then with Program 9, towards zero waste, we just wanted to echo some of the points that we raised in our draft waste management and minimisation plan that the board put forward, and that just being around behavioural change in the city. So what we mean by that is if we really want to create a zero waste city, that comes back to how do we change and make systemic change towards our behaviour. And I think part of that is looking at celebrating organisations, individuals and businesses that are already doing that. And then with lastly, Program 10, Sustainable Food Systems. The board supports the council's aim for planting 500 fruit trees in schools and communities. We love that. Issues sort of had been raised around could this create flow-on issues with rodents and insects being attracted by the fallen fruit. But speaking of fruits, a low-hanging fruit win would also be to introduce organic rubbish collection in the CBD. So those are just a few things that we just wanted to reiterate, and thank you so much for the opportunity to listen to our submission. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah.
Kia ora, thanks so much, Bridget. And one of my kids just about only eats carrots, so it's the go-to. The SDG alignment. While it's been raised as part of the climate change strategy submission, and that's number 13 and probably 11 as well, the council has a range of things that it does in other spheres. So when you look at our waterways work and all of that kind of stuff, rather than just through the climate change strategy, do you see this as an opportunity for us to, do some sort of SDG audit of everything that council does in some way and actually bring it in across our work programs?
Yes, yeah, that would be fantastic.
And how do you see that then informing what we do rather than just being something that we say we're doing this and we've had a look.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think first of all, it starts with awareness raising and using the language and you know, the SDG icons. So when you see, so that is in itself helping to promote and raise awareness about that framework. I think that's a starting point. But from there, it could also be with, you know, when we talk, what program was it? Was it program 6? You know, and talking about a series of events and activities. Maybe there's a way to also include sustainability training and awareness through that as well. So running SDG education programs within that training too.
Yeah.
So it comes back to using the language, promoting the framework, and also going back to the targets that sit behind that SDG as well. So it's not just playing SDG bingo, saying we do this and this and this. It's actually looking at what the targets that sit behind those goals as well. So we're doing it authentically and genuinely.
That's great, thanks.
Yeah, Aaron.
Yeah, thank you for raising the anxiety and stuff around any major issue that faces the world. This is obviously gets labelled quite a major one all the time, a crisis, an emergency, so on and so forth. With the SDGs, are they ranked?
No, they aren't in order of priority. However, SDG 1, no poverty, probably takes pride in place because the SDGs, before that framework, was the Millennium Development Goals, and they were also a 15-year effort. So the MDGs look to address poverty, and the SDGs hopes to finish it. So there isn't one SDG that's most important, but if you did have to pick one, it's probably no poverty.
Which is interesting because the UN economists, the working panel for climate change, put poverty at the top of the list, and the greatest way to reduce climate change is to reduce poverty globally, because it gives people options and ways out. Yeah, thank you for that. Have you listened to the economist group talk about the SDGs?
The economist group?
Yeah, appointed by the UN.
No, I haven't, but I look forward to doing that when I get home.
Look it up, because when they have to rank them, when they work with billionaires that want to give away money and save the world, they said the billionaires often get quite a surprise when you say where you'll get your most bang for buck for changing the planet and saving the world in alignment with the SDGs. So it is quite an interesting piece to look at.
Thanks, Aaron.
That sort of kind of links to the question that I was going to ask, because I'll frame it as a question, because the Christchurch Foundation have raised this issue around the SDGs as well, because it's how you speak the international language directly to the major philanthropists and agencies, organisations throughout the world, and obviously the UN as well. But all of them align around the SDGs. So, and I think Sarah's hit the nail on the head. It's not just the climate change strategy; it's actually the LTP.
Yeah.
So I'm prepared to accept this as a submission on the LTP as well, because I think we need to think about how we embed our framing of these deeper conversations, like for the Ōtautahi Avon River Corridor is one that's come up many times. How do we frame that in the context of the SDGs as well? Yeah.
And I see this as, it's a massive opportunity for Ōtautahi too, because currently, according to the SDG dashboard, New Zealand is sitting at number 16 on the SDG global rank. Those sitting in 1, 2 and 3, it's a typical Scandinavian success story. So I'd love to see New Zealand actually strive for one of those 3 positions, or at least strive to achieve the goals in general. But we're already in the international spotlight around how we have responded to COVID, so why not take this as an opportunity to also lead the way in sustainability and climate?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your submission.
Thank you.
Appreciated. Waikura Linwood Central Heathcote Community Board, Alexandra Davids.
Kia ora koutou. The Linwood Central Heathcote Community Board would like to thank you all for the opportunity to submit on the draft Ōtautahi Christchurch Climate Change Strategy. I would also like to thank Michelle Lomax for chairing the submissions committee, and I know she hoped to be here today. I'd like to start today's submission by stating that while the board believes in the good intention behind the climate change strategy, we believe at this stage it's very high level with little detail. When there is more detail though, we believe it will need to be translated into action on the ground in everything that council does. So the strategy is not just a talk fest, and as we all know, actions speak louder than words. The board has noted, and we approve, that staff reports now have a section on climate change impact considerations, which demonstrates the importance council is placing on the matter. But practically, what does that mean on the ground? And what is the future focused thinking that staff are able to refer to actually make that aspect of the report meaningful? We'd like to ask a serious question of the council on this matter. Are we resourcing staff to be effective in this space? And will we have qualified and experienced staff that can make meaningful and holistic change? Please don't allow this to simply be a tick box. The board would like to bring to the council's attention one of the issues we face as a city, and that is the simple fact that climate change doesn't even make it onto a proportion of our citizens' radars when their day-to-day focus is maintaining a roof over their head and making sure there is food on the table. Sustainable communities are the communities that are functioning well. That being said, the board recognises that sustainable practice is not just about environmental stuff. It is about all four well-beings: economic, social and cultural, as well as environmental. To that end, the board have focused on social well-being in its community board plan and can't emphasise enough the importance of council holding strong, connected and resilient communities at the forefront of all of its decision making around addressing climate change. People need to work together to lift and raise each other up and work towards changing our practice together. If we work together and recognise the strengths already in our communities and support the mahi that is already happening, we will not need to reinvent the wheel. We are all busy in our respective fields, and it's not necessarily about bright, new, shiny initiatives, but building on what is already happening, sharpening our practice and continuously improving. We have community groups, organisations, mana whenua businesses, schools and not-for-profits working collaboratively in this space, and we need to continue to build on the work they are putting in. They are the ones with the local knowledge, but we need to ensure that we are more enabling. So we have some pictures of some of the people that are doing amazing stuff. The strategy will need strong buy-in from the community though, through creating awareness and education. And the board thinks this should be communicated regularly through the council's communications to the community in simple language for all cultures. The board also recognised that future thinking in our urban planning is critical. For example, currently our planning rules do not allow for legal use of grey water, which could both decrease pressure on the use of potable water and processing of wastewater. The board would like to encourage council to be proactive in this area, thinking outside of the box and leading in this space. The Waikato Board would also like to remind the council that while we often think about climate change directly affecting the coast, it is also our river deltas that are most highly impacted by coastal inundation. Rising groundwaters and floodplains. This must always be considered when making decisions around inundation, as we already see communities affected by this issue. And I have another little slide. We recognise that climate change is so complex that it requires the whole breadth of expertise in council. We cannot work in silos on this matter. Across disciplines, technical expertise, including communities, and of course, you, the decision makers. This calls for us to work out how we operate with a collaborative, high-trust approach. It is a big ask, but it's the only way forward. I would like to finish by asking several questions. How do we make this easier for citizens to do themselves? And how do we remove barriers and really take community governance to the next level? Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Questions? Did you, yeah, because that was not provided in the submission pack.
I can give you a copy of that. Yeah,
I think
can
if you
email it if you like.
email it through to the Secretariat, they'll put it online. It was an excellent submission, and obviously your community board's given a lot of really deep thinking to this and to the key issues. So thank you very much.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.
Waihoro Spraden Cashmere Community Board. We've got Lee Sampson today instead of Carolyn Potter.
Yeah, good afternoon. Apologies from Carolyn,
That's
obviously.
right.
This was also well debated on a local level, so I'll try and refine this as much as I can. First, we urgently need collective action on climate change. Our community board's vision is to advocate for this so that people can live safe, healthy, interesting and connected lives in an area that is clean, stable, with clean, stable waterways, healthy ecological corridors, attractive and usable green spaces and exciting and varied recreational opportunities. We acknowledge that central government is a big party in this, but also with it communities, unions, households, businesses, iwi, and local government itself is a key stakeholder. I don't think we can underestimate how much influence the people in this room have got in making active strides forward. We obviously support the draft strategy, but we did find it lacking in detail and tangibles, and also some measurability in terms of what we're trying to achieve. Secondly, in terms of the draft long-term plan, a major concern would be that we've made huge savings as an organisation over the last few months, and we're concerned that there isn't maybe a ring-fenced fund to make sure we can actually achieve some of the deliverables. So you've asked departments, managers to make significant savings, and we're worried that this might be saddled. Achieving some of these deliverables might be saddled back with staff with very little resources. A lot of this is going to depend on capital works. So we're, hopefully through the deliberations that are happening at the moment with the long-term plan, you are setting aside ring-fence funds to deliver what we need to in terms of climate change. In terms of the goals, there was 3 goals that we really honed in as a community board. Goal 3 is we have a just transition to an innovative, low-emission economy. A just transition is vital to achieving not only a clean environment, but also a healthy economy that is equitably distributes benefits. But we ask for more clarity on how social justice will be balanced with economic development. We expect a tripartite approach with employers, unions and government jointly developing policies to address employment and workforce challenges. We also support Work Programme 3, adapting and greening infrastructure systems, including increasing native tree cover across the city, which aligns with the Climate Change Commission's recent recommendations. But we ask that Council also take steps to streamline regulatory processes to make it easier for people to incorporate green infrastructure. We also ask that Council advocates to central government to make new homes greener. So that's Alexander talked about rainwater collection and grey water, renewable energy systems and improved glazing systems. And these also create a more resilient society as well. So there's a win-win there. The third programme that we really focused on was low-emission transport systems. Several of the priorities of our community board plan focus on sustainable transport options such as cycleways, and we also support rapid transit corridors and free buses for 2 years to encourage public transport. We're this was a conversation that was brought up this morning, but we're frustrated by the lack of vision in terms of the rapid transport mechanisms, rapid transit systems. We've already got at least 2 corridors. We've got a southeast to west corridor in terms of heavy rail from the port throughout west. And we've also obviously got a north connection as well, which aren't heavily used. So I think that's a really good starting point. And we've also got, so we just ask that the councillors do what they can to advocate in terms of the partnership committee to make sure that business case is forthcoming. We know there's a desire by central government to see rapid transit mechanisms, so we just ask you to do everything in your influence to try and make that happen as soon as practicable. So it's probably me in a nutshell. So.
Very good. Thank you. Questions? Mike?
Thanks for your submission. Just on your last point there, when you talk about the transit corridors and also free buses for 2 years, do you think when you look, I guess, at Greater Christchurch and actually where the population lies, that potentially we should be looking about how to move the residents of Christchurch through with public transport instead of actually going right out to where there's less people outside of the 2 districts?
Yeah, we the analogy I had heard is the big fat banana, where you've got the growth out north and the growth to the southwest. So what you've got to actually reach those communities. So logical corridors would be obviously north. There'd be the university and the airport. There'd be Hornby, Horswell, and maybe even touching an R-patch. So it's frustrating to think that we think this, although the capital spend is big, I think there's some pretty obvious corridors.
Yeah. Because I guess when you look at the current 2, they're talking about, there's probably 50 to 60 kilometres of network there.
Yeah.
But potentially, do you think there could be more gain by having potentially 5 10k or 6 10k corridors within Christchurch City that actually connects Christchurch City people?
The visual representation I've seen is like a hand. It's like a 5-finger of all of those corridors. You've got a central corridor, you've got housing growth around it, and then you've got green space. So you've got that heading out to the east of the city is what I've seen. But I don't know if that answers your question, Mike.
That's right.
But,
So the other thing when you talk about 2 years free public transport, do you think we also need to, as well as obviously the fare, which is a barrier to some people, not everyone, actually work out how we can actually allow more people to access public transport itself?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got holes in our network in our area, several that I think our age-friendly Spread and Cashmere has made a submission to ECAN on. The more coverage you've got and the more barriers you remove to using public transport, the better in our eyes. So just remove the hurdles.
Right, one last question. And so do you think actually we should focus, I guess, on these livable communities where you can actually get everywhere you need to go, employment, school, within a 15-minute walk or bike ride?
Yeah. Thank you.
Anyone else? Jimmy Chen.
Thank you. Mayor, your particular concern, particular because of this year, council long-term plan is kind of take a prudent way, conservative long-term plan. You're concerned whether it's sufficient resources or budget to implement those climate change. But I just want to know in which area you thought a moment I'll draft a long-term plan, whether need to proper amendment can achieve this climate change goal. Particularly, you emphasize program 7 low emission transport or program 3. Those good planning and engage working with the community.
I think every part, because we haven't got many tangibles, we haven't got a roadmap in terms of the strategy. So I think everything needs to be looked at it in terms of cost benefit analysis. But you're going to need a fund to actually, to carry out. So that's my concern, that you've made operational savings, but you've got no separate standalone fund, whether that's for a heightened sustainability fund as such that you've had in the past. So unless you've got that, you're not going to be able to achieve anything. So it's all good in the world to have a strategy, but it's going to take hard capital to implement a lot of this. So I don't know which particular one, Councillor Chen, to be honest. Or I haven't got a specific because I haven't got the tangibles in front of me at the moment. So.
Melanie.
It hasn't been mentioned in the written submission, but do you think our board would support urban farming and home gardening
I don't know if we should go into that
as
today.
part of Program 10?
Absolutely. I know our community board is, in terms of our Edible Garden Awards, Sustainability Awards, anything that we can do in that space would be useful and helps with well-being. We know all of those things, so absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, look, thank you very much, Lee. It's much appreciated that you were able to attend today to make the submission and to respond to questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. The last one before the afternoon tea break is Ōtautahi Heathcote River Network. So not one of our community boards, but Mr. Daniel Collins, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kia ora koutou. So I'll speak on the Ōtautahi Heathcote River Network's views on the climate change strategy. In the submissions that we made, we addressed issues relating to the specific goals and objectives, but here I'll reframe those into 4 more condensed, more distilled points to take away. Now, the network, as you presumably know, is concerned with restoring and protecting the ecological integrity and modi of the Ōtautahi Heathcote River for the benefit of all the communities therein. And so that relates a lot to climate change. And so the 4 points that I wish to raise here are these. The first one, be bolder. I know you've heard that a lot from many submitters, in some cases about adaptation and mitigation efforts. Here I'm specifically mentioning the target, the emissions target. While it looks like it's close to the 1.5 degree world from the Paris Accord, can't quite tell, and it's just, given the details about methane, my recommendation or request is that you be bolder and aim for that 1.5 degree in some way. The more we mitigate, the less we need to adapt. And so it can save money in the long run and other benefits. The second point relates to the just transition. Now, in the strategy that was framed as, in terms of jobs and the economy, for meeting mitigation goals, but I suggest that it be expanded, not just about transitioning towards carbon neutrality, but also transitioning in terms of adaptation. The mitigation and adaptation should be done hand in hand. And as I know Alexander, two speakers previous mentioned, we should think broadly, more broadly than just one pillar of sustainability. This just transition, in our opinion, should address economics, society, culture, and environment altogether. So the third point would relate to this touches home to the network with the Ōtautahi River. Many climate actions benefit the river and vice versa. And so I ask you to look for co-benefits between the two. Take, for example, revegetation of the Port Hills. That has the climate benefit of sinking carbon and has the ecological benefit of reducing the sediment yield, sediment load to the river, which is one of the major pollutants in Christchurch's most polluted river. Similarly, reducing the road transportation can reduce brake wear and heavy metal discharge into the river, and as well shifting to EVs with braking, going to regenerative braking, is another hidden benefit of changing transport behaviour for the river. So we have co-benefits, and so it's just a win-win situation, a strategic approach. Lastly, it's about communication and engagement. Climate change adaptation and mitigation is complicated and uncertain. It's hard. You have the task of coming up with a plan that transcends decades into the future. None of us will be making these decisions at that time, I suspect. But we collectively need to bring all communities on board. That's hard when things are uncertain and complex. But I do ask you not to simplify messages, not to simplify the science. I'm a climate change researcher myself. And bring on board and establish the social license to make these decisions by being clear about the uncertainties and important actions necessary. The Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment released a report in 2004 on the importance of science being upfront about the uncertainties, which sometimes get lost in high-level documents such as the strategy. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time.
Look, I was really interested in your submission because you used language in a way that I hadn't kind of really thought through around adaptation, and also the significance of that final point about giving people a false sense of certainty about a fixed future. I think that was what you said, and I really would like you to just develop that a little bit further, because I'm nervous. Central government's announced that they're bringing legislation in to replace the RMA. The third one's called climate change adaptation, so I'm just keen for you to say a bit more about that.
So in the guidance for coastal adaptation, there's suggestions about something called dynamic adaptive policy pathways. Some of you presumably have heard of that. That's a way of trying to accept what we don't know and making decisions despite these limitations. We always do these things. Is it going to rain today? I might take an umbrella. But these decisions that you have on your shoulders are so much harder than that. They go beyond the timeframes of the current plans, LTP, 3-year, 10-year, and so the uncertainty explodes, but we still have to make decisions in spite of that. There are ways to do that, technical ways. But a key point that the PCE report was saying, indeed, that people trust scientists or experts, decision makers, more if they're upfront about the hard bits. And think of, in terms of a false sense of security, if we build us houses up to levees, build the levees higher, think of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, vulnerable communities. That's also happening in New Zealand, in a way. So we have to realise that the average scientific projection is not what's going to happen. It might. We might overshoot, we might undershoot. And generally, we might have to think about all that whole range. Yeah. And that's not easy for the general public who doesn't think about these issues on a day-to-day basis. But
yeah, it's hardest in the developed environment, but and that's the real challenge that we've got in front of us. So look, thank you very much for your submission.
Thank you for your time.
Extremely helpful. Thank you. All right, we have a brief recess for just 10 minutes, I think. 3:30. Okay, so if we could be back here at 3:30 for the next submission. Thank you.
The next person to present on the climate change draft strategy is Benjamin Love. Oh, you are not Benjamin Love.
Sorry, can't hear.
Sorry? Is Benjamin Love not here? Oh, hello. Sorry, it's Benjamin Love. Sorry.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Ready?
Yes, all good. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming along.
On? Yep, cool. We need to stop doing low density housing immediately. It's destroying the environment, it's destroying the future, it's destroying so much. Our younger generations cannot afford housing. We need to switch to high density mixed use housing. We need commercial, office space, and housing all in one space. This should be apartments probably. Sorry, should be. Globally, we'll save $17 trillion by 2050 just on combating climate change alone from switching to high density living, mixed use. Our current low density housing requires significantly more input in commuting, and it makes public transport more unsustainable. The average person who lives in a high density area spends about 3.7 times more in commuting. And it's more emissions. It's 3.7 more emissions times more emissions. And it's about 97 hours in the year in traffic, and that costs the average commuter about $1,348 US. This is American figures, but they're very, very similar to New Zealand's figures. This increases congestion. Sorry, it's all right. We need to have denser environments, so we can support our communities for future. We can support public transport better. And yes, yeah. If we even switched to high density housing now, the global generation of economic revenue generation will be at $26 trillion. Yeah. We need to be walkable neighbourhoods. About a 15-minute city model is ideal, and that should be 15 minutes to light rail or a metro rail as well, instead of just buses. Because it takes about 7 dwellings per an acre to support buses, 38 plus people per an acre to support light rail, 45 people per an acre to support a metro. In Texas, they found that implementing light rail made the land value around the stations about twice as much. Any questions? It's also, I could go on for longer, but...
No, look, thank you. Your submission's fantastic,
Yep.
and you really have captured the essence of, a really important element of it. Mike?
Thanks for that. I guess what we're seeing is we're areas that we're trying to put, I guess, more dense living, and there's complaints saying you're putting too much into that area of land. Do you think, though, actually, if we're allowed to go higher, but actually with that we make them actually have more green spaces as
yes, well? Absolutely. We can have green spaces built into our current living. There's rooftop gardens, rooftop areas. I say even have like one street, pedestrian only, one street roads, do that pattern. Every single bottom layer should be probably commercial, not residential. So really mixed use. I could go on for better, and I could be a bit clearer, but you can come ask me afterwards. Yeah.
No, look, thank you very much for that, and that's the end of the time for the presentation. Yeah. But we also picked up the comments you made around the importance of urban design.
It's very important.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, Dot Lovell Smith, who I assume it was before. Sorry about that.
That's all right. I was just told to come in by the other bloke. That's all. Kia ora.
Kia ora, welcome.
And thank you for giving me the chance to make a submission. I'm aware that my written submission sounded slightly angry, which expressed my frustration at what I was thinking is the slow action being taken to mitigate the effects of climate change. Today I just want to perhaps make two stronger points on. The first one is planning, and I basically endorse everything that Ben said before me in terms of mixed use residential and light industry. And I think our present regulations probably stem back to the times when industry was things like tanneries and smelly, dirty, noisy things. They're not now. We could mix up an awful lot of industry and residential. I think that there needs to be a much more comprehensive planning department within the council, which joins up the dots, all of the dots which are features of climate change mitigation. You've made your 7 points, or whatever it was, points in your pamphlet, which are really good. But I think they need to be considered in all aspects of, subdivision planning and individual resource consent granting. And there's some really good things happening around the place, but just as I feel hopeful, I come up against something like the new houses in the racecourse area along Yolthurst Road, which are jammed together right up against the fence, individual housing. It looks terrible now. I don't know what it's going to look like in 50 years. So it's just that, the whole effect of planning, I think, needs to be bigger and take more into consideration, and climate change has to be the bottom line of everything. And the other thing I want to rave on about, of course, is public transport. I think you've all heard me talking about that. And again, I'm just sort of worried. It's 53% of the city's emissions, but is transport. And some of that, of course, is trucks and moving goods around, which I know all about living in Hornby, because they all seem to move through Hornby. But I use the bus a lot, and there's a lot of things wrong with it, that using a bus, that make people not happy with it. For example, some of the roads are still quite rough, and the bus's springs seem to be a bit defective, so that you end up feeling car sick and, sort of feeling. There's bad servicing of the buses, so that I don't think the gear changing's smooth enough, the brakes are horrible. There's quite often I end a bus trip feeling quite ill, and I think, oh God, I'm never going to go by bus again. The idea to close down, sorry, I've lost time, but Riccarton is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, we're talking about safety in the streets, and to close down a safe place to wait for buses is absolutely counterproductive to encouraging people to use buses. We need much more encouragement and proactive advertising and incentive and discussions about public transport to get people out of their cars and into buses. And I've put a little bit of those points in my submission, like having lock-up bikes at supermarkets and things, lock-up bike places so you can bike to the supermarket, lock your bike up, catch a bus to the city and back, and things like that. All sorts of things that would make it easier and more attractive for everybody, but especially old people like me who are getting older and feebler by the day, and we need more and more support to keep us moving around the city.
Thank you very much, and you've been a lot more detailed in your actual submission, which has been very helpful, so thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Annette Hamblett. Kia ora and welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to our submission. I'm solo today as Michael's not able to be here. We put quite a lot of time into the submission. There's a lot more detail on that. This is just, stressing the main points. First of all, great to see the case for climate change stated so strongly in the draft strategy, but it's not urgent enough and bold enough, and that's not news to you from what were in the submissions. There is great urgency to act because we don't have much time to reduce our emissions. So we want to see our council act with urgency and take people along with it. We want you to be a bold leader, set a vision, educate the public and prioritise where it most counts. The strategy needs a vision people can understand and relate to get a feel for what the city will be like when we've made the required changes. And I take the point from Daniel previously saying we don't know exactly what it's going to be like, but we can give some ideas, I think. And graphics and animations might be a good way to show some of the ways we might go. The council needs to lead boldly like the central government did to address the threat of COVID. It's equally much of a crisis. Get serious on education. We need public education campaigns in as many forms as possible so people really get that we all need to change the way we do things. Use all available channels, including the council website, school programs, billboards, rates notices, backs of buses. Use the strategy to set ambitious targets based on up-to-date science. Follow with concrete actions that add up to meet these targets. Make it clear what the steps are to meet the targets and include interim goals. Take climate change into account across all council decisions. Require council control companies to explicitly take climate change into account in their investment decisions and to meet the council's 2030 net carbon neutrality target for operations. Prioritise reducing emissions, especially transport emissions, as these are the source of most of them. Set interim 3-yearly emission reductions goals for the city and report back on them. Track and publish the council's own emissions reductions. A logical and convenient public transport system is a must, so is enabling and encouraging people to use active transport as much as possible and discouraging private vehicle use. Encourage e-bike use. Christchurch is made for it. Work with ECAN to provide more regular buses and more efficient routes to avoid the long, circuitous trips sometimes required to get across the city. Enable and encourage commuters from outlying areas to leave cars outside the inner city. Send a proposal to Cabinet to bring in a regional fuel tax to help fund transformation to low-emission transport. Encourage and support suburbs to transition to 15-minute villages. Let us see how we're doing as a city. Provide ways for residents to regularly and easily monitor the council's progress and success in achieving targets and those of council-controlled companies. Use the knowledge that's out there. Make use of the expertise of Christchurch's transition engineer, Professor Susan Crumdick, Canterbury University, to guide the way we transition the city, to reduce energy use and to build up climate change resilience. We are in a climate and an ecological crisis. We must take both these crises into account in all our actions as a city. Thank you.
Look, thank you very much. And as you said, there's a lot more detail sitting on your actual submission itself. So thank you, and pass on thanks to Michael as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Brodie. Kia ora and welcome.
Thank you for hearing my submission. I suspect I'm going to repeat a few things that Annette has just said. I'm here as a concerned citizen. I think I'm in the category of people who think there's a climate crisis, a climate emergency. And I'm really keen to see much more vigorous action throughout society. You're probably aware that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, several years ago now, said that we need deep fundamental changes in the way that we live our lives if we're going to combat this huge challenge. And I applaud the strategy. It's great to see things getting started. Now, I do look back 10 years. In 2010, you got started, and some things happened, but by no means enough. So I'm hoping this strategy will be a real launching board for really vigorous action. In my submission, I make 3 main points. The first one is that I think we need a really vigorous public education campaign. People are aware of climate change. I saw a survey recently. I think 70% of people were aware. But my experience around the city is that we're not aware enough. And I walk a lot. I cross over, for instance, Brougham Street during the day, just jam-packed with traffic in both directions. 70% of those people are aware of climate change. But are they willing to take the strong action that we need? And that we need pretty well immediately. If you're going to achieve 50% emissions reductions over the whole city by 2030, that's a 7% year-on-year reduction in emissions. Are you or are we going to achieve 7% reductions this year, next year? The longer we leave it, the more difficult it's going to become. So a public engagement campaign, I think part of this, you've got to project a vision of how you see Christchurch in 2050. This has got to be in our faces. It's all hidden away at the moment. It can be visual. Get your graphic designers. Present us with how you see Christchurch, graphically and in words. Yep, this engagement campaign's got to be in our faces, and it's got to be continuing. You don't just do it for a few weeks and then stop. We need billboards around the city in prominent places. I still read a newspaper, a paper newspaper, very rare. But we need full-page adverts in the newspapers, a vigorous electronic media campaign. And this has to happen from the word go from now. My second point is about...
We've come to the end of the time, so just
wrap
dear. Up the second and third
emissions
point
reduction
together.
goals,
Yep.
great to have them. They're too long term. We need interim goals. You need to report on progress in achieving those interim goals. And yeah, this has got to be publicly available information to get people on board. And then thirdly, great strategy, 10 programmes, 66 focus areas. To me, it was just a brainstorm. What are your priority areas? 1, 2, 3. Get going on number 1. Presumably transport and not sustainable food production. 500 trees, fruit trees in schools. Great. Great thing to do. But it's barely going to scratch the surface of our emissions. Whereas deep changes to the way we get around the city will make a huge difference. And it can make a difference quickly. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Thank you. The next one is Roger Larkins. Good afternoon, welcome.
Good afternoon, Ms Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Councillors, thank you for your time. I may be an unusual voice in this proceeding. I trust that you've all had a chance to look at the data that I've submitted. I want to stress from the start that I do agree that global temperatures have been rising since 1970. They did decline from 1930 to 1970. They would appear to be higher now than they were in the 1930s. I would also like to say that there is very likely to be a human aspect to this warming. Finally, I would say that I don't see myself as a denier. However, I would like to point out that temperatures, while they have been rising, peaked in 2016, and they are now, on average globally, 0.75 lower in the month of April than they were in 2016. Coincidentally, they're also 0.65 degrees Celsius lower than they were in 1998. In other words, there has been negligible temperature increase for over 20 years. Sea levels are rising. Sea levels have risen consistently. There is tide gauge data from all over the country and around the world that shows there is no acceleration. Arctic sea ice is moderately lower than it has been for the last 20 years, but it is not declining, and there is every evidence that suggests it was lower in the 1920s. There have been many climate models. The average climate model has suggested that by 2020, there would have been a 0.44 Celsius rise in temperatures across the planet. The rise has actually been 0.15 Celsius. It's been running at about a third of the models. Bearing that in mind, emissions do need to be controlled. I fully applaud the speakers that I've heard, but I applaud them for the fact that they want to institute change that is going to benefit community, not from a climate basis, but from a functional basis. Better transport, fantastic. Reforest the hills, stop the pollution in the rivers, great. I applaud all these initiatives. I just don't want to see climate as being the focus of it, because climate is not accelerating, not changing at the level that is commonly perceived in the media. I know that my submission included references. There were 140 papers published last year alone by climate scientists around the world that demonstrated that in different places climate was warmer in the last 1,000 years than it is now. Those places vary from South Africa to South America to Greenland to Alaska. Thank you.
Thank you. Time for quick questions, Sarah?
Thanks so much for that and the detail in your submission. Just checking though that you were clear that while that you don't think that climate change should be a reason for making these changes, the changes that we're planning are still worthwhile for their community and potentially other environmental sort of sedimentation.
You have a huge
aspects.
raft of changes that are proposed. I applaud many of them.
Yeah.
I think the focus has to be on them for their own sake and not for the sake of a purported climate emergency that doesn't exist.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. Much appreciated. Thank
If
you.
anyone's interested, I have copies of about 20 graphs.
Yep. Thank you. The next one is, now I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, is it Kit Dardney? Avon Heathcote Estuary Ōtautahi Trust.
Thank you, Leanne.
Sorry, how do I pronounce your surname, Kit?
Dudney.
Dudney, sorry.
But we
my
came
apologies.
across some members of the family in Devon in the UK who said you wouldn't be calling yourself Dudney. With you it's Dowdney, so...
Right.
Thank you very much.
In Scotland, mine's pronounced DL, so there you go.
Very good. Kia ora tātou, my name is Kit Dudney and I am the chairperson of the Avon Heathcote Estuary Ōtautahi Trust, and I was here for a submission recently on the long-term plan, and I'm backing that up with one on the climate change draft proposal that you've made. Thanks very much for working with us in the past, and thanks very much for listening to my submission today. I'm not going to dwell on too much of it, but I do want to advance the idea that as a trust we're very, very keen on restoring wetlands around the estuary, as you're probably well aware, and that in Charlesworth Reserve, which we've been working in collaboration with the Christchurch City Council over the last 20 years, we've done a terrific job with getting volunteers to participate in restoring that wetland, and it's a marvellous sort of flagship endeavour that we've both worked on, so thanks for your support with that. My main point here is that I totally disagree with the previous speaker. We do have a climate crisis on our hands. There might have been 130 articles published last year on negating that, but there's thousands that support it. We need to decrease our carbon into the environment, and one of the mitigating factors that we can protect our city around is by increasing wetlands. Wetlands, as you may also be aware, are huge sequestering parts of the environment which capture a lot of carbon, which we're polluting our environment at the moment. So Charlesworth is doing a good job at trying to naturally sequestering those elements of carbon back into the environment and capturing it. We suggest that council could also speed up the restoration project of wetlands around the Linwood paddocks, which you might be aware of just south of the oxidation sewage treatment ponds, and also in the lower reaches of the Ōpawaho and Avon rivers. So the Heathcote Ōpawaho River and the Ōtautahi Avon River. So that mainly is the focus of our submission, is to encourage you guys to consider speeding up what we've already done at Charlesworth with those lower reaches of the estuary and the rivers. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thanks so much, Kit. I think one of the things that we've been looking at in the strategy is the planting of stuff, but that tends to be in drier areas and on solid land. So Charlesworth took a huge amount of volunteer effort, didn't it?
That's
and
right.
So there's a lot of people still keen to do more of that kind of work as well.
That's correct. And we arrange, just last weekend we had our annual public planting, but every weekend, every Sunday there's 12 till 2 of planting.
Yeah.
So we would certainly be arranging people on the ground if we were to promote the wetland restoration programs in other areas of the estuary, and we would take over the role of doing what we've done with Charlesworth.
Yeah, so a small amount of additional I guess, council stuff when it comes to that sort of urban ranger space, those kind of things as well as needed to be able to do that, isn't it?
Yes, and in our long-term plan we submitted that we'd have a single park ranger associated with the estuary, so we just have one go-to person.
Thanks.
James?
Kia ora. What are your, if any, qualifications, maybe academic, that support you and your comments about climate change?
If you keep up with the area of this in the established journals and the established and respected elements of the commentary, so those are my areas. In particular, you'll be hearing from my father tomorrow, who is an expert in this area, and he gives me all of this information through various sources that he uses. They're reputable peer-reviewed journals.
What's your father's name?
Chris Dudney.
Thanks.
Well, at least I'll be pronouncing it correctly. Yanni.
Thank you. Just in regards to your submission, you talk about enhanced protection around some of the ecological values. I just wondered if you'd given much consideration to the Heathcote Ōpawaho being a site of ecological significance, and whether you think as a council our planning regimes are strong enough, or whether we need to do more in a planning sense.
Yeah, that's a really really good question. I'm not sure that I know enough about those plans of the councils. I have been working, I and my trust board have been working in concert with council about the future of the lower Ōpawaho Heathcote River catchment area. It's incredibly diverse, with the salt marshes and the reed beds and things that you'll see in the lower reaches of Ferrymead and things like that. So I'm sure that the people who are able to consider these things are on the ball with this.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was just reflecting on the cycle that went through.
Thank you very much for your submission today, and thank you for presenting to us.
Kia ora.
Thank you. I'm told that the representative of Diamond Harbour Community Association isn't here yet, so...
No, he's here.
He's here?
Yes, who told you that?
I don't know. It was a mysterious piece of paper. You're Thomas Culper?
Yes.
Yeah. Welcome. Come forward, please. You've been here right from the start, but I didn't know who you were, so sorry. My apologies.
No problem at all. Good afternoon, and thank you for hearing me out. I'm speaking here on behalf of the Diamond Harbour Community Association, and we fully support the 4 goals, the 9 principles, and the 10 action programs of the strategy, but we wouldn't call it really a strategy, more sort of a list of endeavours, hopes and wishes, rather than something which is detailed enough and has sort of implementation targets behind it. How do I switch this? Here. No. Okay. One of the things we think is missing is that there are no greenhouse gas budgets associated with the strategy. Now, if I would ask any of your councillors what the average costs of a house, a car, an iPhone, or a packet of noodles would be, you would give me an answer which is in the order of magnitude correct. If I ask you how much emitted greenhouse gases in one of the products, I would get probably blank looks. And why is that? Why don't we have a framework like we have for our annual plan, for the LTP, for your debt ceilings? All these things are second nature. And why don't we have it for greenhouse gases? Is it not important, or could it be that if we don't have it, we are toast? We're talking about our culture, our values, our species might be wiped out if we are going beyond 4 degrees. So how do we manage this? And the old adage is we can only manage what we measure. We strongly suggest to Council to implement a framework of units of greenhouse gas to be associated with your actions. so that we know where we stand. I mean, other speakers have already said that we need to track what we're doing and we have to report on our progress. And yeah, that is, I think, one of the big, in our point of view, one of the big things which are missing. Each of the 10 action points has an impressive list of things which we are already doing. And if you read them, you think, what's the problem if you are already putting so much effort into these things? Why are we still emitting more? And then the question, of course, arises, what is the reason why these things don't have tractions? I just remember 35 years ago we were talking about waste minimization, and we still seem to have that on our agenda, right? So there could be 3 reasons, and they're not mutually exclusive. But one could be that we don't want to rock the boat. I mean, we want to be seen as proactive politically, but we are very unambitious in terms of implementation. And John Key did that, said that so nicely. It says that we don't want to be a climate change leader. We want to be a follower. Great. Then there could be, of course, powerful forces, you know, that resist change, and with a bit more encouragement, and we can change the course and achieve our 4 goals. Or it could be that the whole approach is wrong, and that we are sort of looking, we are changing the symptoms or working around the symptoms, but not addressing the root causes. And we would need transformative change instead of incremental change. So, just to give you an overview, forget about it, just look at the red and the blue line, right? So our emissions are increasing in 1990, that's where the red line pathway to 2050 round would be, and the blue line is where we have to be, and it will be vertical at some stage, right? This is a free fall, yeah? And we owe the area between the red line and the blue line is what we have consumed in the meantime since 1990, since we know about this problem, and we have to pay it back. It's a debt to the planet. So it's great to say we will be carbon neutral by 2050, but we owe a tremendous debt already, and this is increasing daily. How do we reconcile our district-wide greenhouse gas emission with a national inventory? We have, I think, 2 Christchurch inventory, 2 years, and they are done by AECOM, and they don't seem to reconcile with the regional and the national done by the MFE. So where is our greenhouse gas inventory data for Christchurch since in a sort of comparable time? From, I think the regional now is from 2017 to 2007 to 2018. One great thing in the current proposal is the sentence, we also need to address the embodied carbon. Fantastic. So we are using a lot of concrete and steel, and we know that these mediums are so climate intensive. We cannot export our problem to say, well, you know, we don't produce it in our city boundaries, or we get it from China. We have to look at building with sustainable materials. We have to look at how will our world look like if we are not having all these materials with high greenhouse gas embedded, or if we don't have them available to us. There's a moral component to all of that. You may have...
Can I ask you to just quickly wind up?
This is the last one.
Great.
Sorry. There's a moral component to that. You may have heard about the judgment of the court, the Constitutional Court of Germany, that it rejected the German version of the Zero Carbon Act there. And they rejected it because it was not in compliance with the Bill of Rights, because it puts too much burden on the young generation instead of... so basically, we are cannibalizing the future of our children. We need strong leadership. yes, we present this, but we also should lead. And I'm thinking about the speech that Churchill gave on the day when he declared war on Germany, and he said, "We can't offer you anything but blood, toil, tears, and sweat." And that's the truth of it, mate.
That's a very good line to end on. Thank you. Nice Churchill quote. Thank you very much for taking the time to make the submission and presenting it in person. Thank you very much. The next is David Hawke.
Rightio, ready to roll? Yep, okay. Well, thanks for the opportunity to talk with you today. Some of you will know that I'm Secretary of Halswell Residents Association, but my presentation today is on my own behalf. We encouraged as an association individuals to put on their own submissions rather than try to put a joint one in together. So there's one really major topic that I want to pick up from my written submission. Before I do that, I would say that as an environmental chemist, the questions that we're talking about here have been mainstream in my field for over 50 years, and it's been quite disappointing that our society has been so slow to pick up the topic. There's a strong emphasis in terms of active transport and public transport in my written submission, but the main thing I want to focus on today is actually engaging with communities. So behaviour change by all of us is going to be essential in minimising climate change, but behaviour change doesn't happen by magic. One of the things that City Council's role is really important is because City Council is very important in our everyday lives. I'm sure you're well aware of that. And as such, City Council has got a strong role in both promoting and supporting behaviour change. There's some confluence here with the mainstream Halswell Residents Association position. We think that City Council does this engagement with its community not particularly well. And we think that as a, just in general in terms of the engagement activities that you undertake, this needs to be broadened out, especially in the present context of the climate strategy. Community boards have obviously got a really strong role, but they must do it better. And we think that there are both structural and cultural issues in the community board system. We're going to talk a lot more about that at the representation review presentation that our Residents Association is going to be doing with you next week. We think there also needs to be a lot broader and additional engagement, and in the submission that I've put in, I emphasise participatory democracy measures and give you some examples of some different approaches. I would say that City Council has done this very well before, the Share an Idea thing. But interestingly, the Greater Christchurch Partnership Committee last week heard from Joe Robertson and Ruth Shah in the Addington community, and they've got a very inclusive community engagement around State Highway 76 that I think City Council could do well to learn from. Kia ora.
Thank you very much for that, and thanks for noticing what was happening at the Greater Christchurch Partnership last week as well. I think you've raised some really really important points for all of us, and it's a very helpful submission. Especially, I love the art stuff too, as a mechanism for engaging people in the broader subject without perhaps frightening them off at the beginning.
Yeah, it's well recognised. I think a very broad approach is going to be needed.
Well, we're going to have to do a broad approach. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Cliff Mason.
Mayor Dalziel, councillors, thank you for the opportunity to come and make this submission. I'm sure you've noticed the quality of the material that you've received, and I hope that you suitably pay attention to the sense of urgency that's being conveyed and for the many practicable suggestions that you've also been given. I just wanted to talk about the persistent problem in our approach to climate change has been some comforting self-delusion, including the idea of net zero emissions, that we can neutralise our fossil carbon emissions but to restore the planetary ecosystem. And this delusion, although it's widely current and it's embedded in legislation in our emissions trading scheme, results from a narrow focus on the atmosphere and the comings and goings of greenhouse gases from it. But the underlying assumptions, especially those around carbon sinks, are unreliable, and the paper I referred to in my written submission, and which was in the media a few months ago from the University of Waikato, suggested that by as early as 2040, land-based vegetation may release more carbon dioxide than it absorbs as a result of physiological responses to increasing temperatures. It's also uncertain, but not unlikely, that there's be more release of carbon dioxide than absorption in times of drought, such as we're currently experiencing. These effects are widely recognised, but often discounted in action plans, even that of the Climate Change Commission. The sad truth is that there's no way of removing carbon from the biosphere, and any new introduction of fossil carbon is forever. And as a result of that, our mitigation is best focused closely on simply reducing our use of fossil fuels to as near zero as possible. And all those other measures, while valuable, are relatively minor importance. The other thing I emphasised in my submission was the importance of embedded or embodied energy, and I'm pleased to hear this being referred to again. And I strongly support the submission which was made by PTL Structural Consultants, which calls for you to implement a net zero embodied carbon plan for Christchurch. I think this would be an excellent approach. It's every new bit of infrastructure, every new building, every new electric vehicle involves embedded emissions. Our assumption about boundless clean energy is to help us through are also questionable as the dry years start to stack up the same as the hot years have. The implication from this is that we must value what we have already got and for which we've paid the emissions cost, and to avoid new embedded emissions as far as possible. Action on embedded emissions is also favourable because it's structural rather than involving behavioural change. So I just want to say that we should focus on fossil fuel usage and embedded energy primarily, but I want to finish with some questions for you. In a climate emergency, is it appropriate that our port exports coal and logs and imports urea and ICE vehicles? Is it appropriate in a climate emergency to promote international travel for tourism and business by provision of airports and convention centres? Is it appropriate in a climate emergency to permit demolition without extensive materials salvage or construction using steel, concrete and glass? Is it appropriate to promote automation and communications technologies that substitute high energy use for human labour? And so I ask you to consider those questions and then to take action that is appropriate to the emergency that you have declared. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Our Zoom participant hasn't signed in, so we'll move on to Jocelyn Pepperell. Kia ora, Jocelyn, welcome.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for the opportunity. As an educator who's been teaching about climate change for a very long time, I'm urging the Council to be much braver in its action to mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change and hence prepare for the future. As I said in my written submission, whilst I agree with the overall tenor of the draft Ōtautahi Christchurch climate change strategy, I'm surprised that more hadn't been achieved since the Council declared a climate emergency in May 2019, or even since the Climate Smart strategy of 2010. I can't help but agree with Professor Hayward's oral submission last week when she suggested in her analysis of the strategy that the climate action within your budget was poorly articulated, lacking objectives, data and allocated resources. It's vital that you consider the legacy you want to leave for those that come after you when you're making tough economic and social decisions, particularly when determining what can be built where. I'm disappointed that Council did not continue the good work started back in the early 2000s prior to the quakes, nor use the opportunities provided by the quakes to move ahead on climate conversations and actions. The statement by Dr. Rob Bell in this very good book, the recent Climate Aotearoa book, on the impact of sea level rise on our coastal communities is pertinent. Adaptation to this ongoing risk requires a new paradigm to work, with the uncertain pace of change summed up by the phrase monitor and act preemptively rather than default to the prevailing mindset of defend and hold the line. Holding the line is becoming increasingly unsustainable. While we definitely need to move much more rapidly in terms of decarbonising our economy and lifestyles, we must also be planning for resettling coastal communities, with the understanding that any resettlement cannot compromise the use of productive land. We still need to be fed. Housing our future population will look different to today's suburban spread. I look forward also to seeing the Climate Leadership Group formed and actively working alongside a citizens' assembly to ensure a greater range of voices and their concerns are heard. There needs to be a true mix of individuals and groups involved in discussions regarding economic and built transformation, so be sure to include creative thinkers, young people, social entrepreneurs and steady state economists. Business as usual within a neoliberal paradigm will not take us to where we need to be in terms of reducing our carbon and ecological footprints. We need to be moving toward a circular or steady state economic paradigm where environmental and human well-being is at its heart. Now, I agree with the previous submitter, David Hawke. Work with community, build expertise and solutions together. It's certainly something I try to engage young people in, planning for the future. Rather than seeing climate change as all doom and gloom, we need to look for opportunities to take the time now to plan for how and where people may be living in 50 to 100 years' time. Look to where local communities have already started such conversations to learn what has worked and not worked for them in terms of engaging their residents. World Environment Day is coming up on June 5th. It's a focus on ecosystem restoration. One area the Council could invest in terms of mitigation is protection and restoration of the natural environment. We need healthy ecosystems for our very survival. Support the work done in this area and provide more staffing for the parks team in the Council. The role rangers play in liaising with and supporting community restoration groups is vital. The relationship building they do with communities cannot be underestimated. Invest in your people, build their expertise, and many of the other things will slot into place. Most importantly, do not delay. Move beyond the round tables to action. Now's the time to be courageous and not be dissuaded from the urgent task. And read this book, please.
Thank you.
Kia ora.
Thank you very much. Now we have got the our Zoom presenter here, Dion Cowley. So welcome, Dion. Thank you very much, and over to you.
Kia ora, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, that's perfect.
Excellent. Kia ora koutou katoa, and thank you for this opportunity to build on our written submission. So my name's Dion Cowley. I'm born and bred here in Taranaki, and as an aside, I held a recent position in the strategy team at New Plymouth District Council, which included the authoring of the 30-year infrastructure strategy, but more importantly, driving the climate action framework adopted prior to my departure. Therefore, I have an appreciation of the effort that goes into this stuff, and well done to everyone in the team for getting to this point in terms of developing the climate change strategy, so well done. So I'm the public sector advisor at Hiringa Energy, a New Plymouth-based zero-emission energy company focused on the production and distribution of green hydrogen as a fuel. For those new to green hydrogen, it's produced using renewable electricity, which splits water into its foundation elements of hydrogen and water. And once separated, the hydrogen is compressed and stored until it's needed, which could be years later or exported to energy-hungry countries like Japan. And in a nutshell, we at Hiringa see New Zealand's energy future being a combination of green electrons or renewable electricity and green molecules or gas to do all the things that electricity can't do very well. So my intention today is to give you a sense of what's happening in the hydrogen space and recommend that hydrogen is put on the table when investigating decarbonisation pathways, especially in hard to treat sectors. It's a bit of a busy slide, so I'll work my way around it. Just starting with Hiringa, founded in 2016. We're based here in New Plymouth, and we've got a staff group of staff members of around 20 now, with a couple of people in Australia. With Australia pouring plenty of money into this space, the recent announcements equating to something like $370 million into advancing their hydrogen economy. So it's a bit of a boom industry over there. Starting at the top left with the Prime Minister, always a good place to start. New Zealand's hydrogen story started making waves internationally, I guess, back in about 2019, when Jacinda Ardern launched the H2 Taranaki roadmap, which outlines the opportunity for Taranaki to leverage its existing oil and gas skills and infrastructure to become a leader in hydrogen production and utilisation. But I guess more importantly for this conversation, it sets the scene for what can be delivered or achieved in our region, such as Canterbury, when a hydrogen economy can gain economies of scale when one project leverages off another to decarbonise hard-to-treat sectors while generating new green jobs. And subsequently, the government released its own green hydrogen strategy, further demonstrating its support for hydrogen. And it's available on the MB website if you want to have a look at that. Top right now, for a number of years, Hiringa and Balance Agri-Nutrients have been working on an industrial-scale green hydrogen production facility in Kapuni, South Taranaki. The project involves 4 new wind turbines feeding electricity into the Balance plant and substituting the feedstock of natural gas with green hydrogen, produced using electricity from the new wind turbines. And this project allows us to achieve economies of scale, which drives down the cost of production. And what that allows is then that renewable or green hydrogen to be distributed throughout our refueling network, which is demonstrated on that map of New Zealand there. And so what we're looking to do is roll out a series of hydrogen refueling stations, starting in the North Island with Canterbury, top of the list for the South Island. And there's a focus on heavy trucks, line haul trucks in the first instance, being the bigger emitters within our transportation sector. So we see the future of New Zealand's mobility being both batteries and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, with the latter being well suited to those heavy duty, high utilisation type vehicles, such as the bigger trucks. The images in the bottom left there relate more to the opportunities specifically for Christchurch. So, like I said, we're planning a refueling station to be operational by the end of 2020, with at least 3 other stations operational in Canterbury by 2025. So the fuel will be available in the near future. It's likely that heavy trucks and aviation sector will be the biggest users in the beginning, but there's also opportunities for Christchurch City Council in terms of its own fleet, as demonstrated in one of those images up there, by Aberdeen City Council in Scotland, which is buses, road sweepers, rubbish trucks, fleet cars, all operating on hydrogen. So it gives you a sense of the sorts of vehicles that hydrogen is well suited to. Another possibility is what New Plymouth District Council has done, which is looking to replace its ageing thermal dryer with one that can burn both natural gas and green hydrogen at its wastewater treatment plant. So it recently received $37 million from the government to kickstart that project, and it's going to cut emissions at that wastewater treatment plant by 20 to 40%.
We've come to the end of the 5 minutes. Have you got much more to say?
No, I'll just cut to the chase, shall I?
Yes, please.
And that is in terms of the buses, which is a focus of our work with Environment Canterbury. We're currently working with all the larger councils across the country to aggregate hydrogen bus demand in order to bring the costs down and also collaborate amongst councils. You can see there's a picture of Auckland Transport's new hydrogen bus, which they're currently trialling. A beautiful piece of Christchurch manufacturing, I must say, built in Rolleston by Global Bus Ventures. And there's a great Christchurch Inc. story that could unfold here if Global Bus Ventures were to scale up and build the hydrogen buses used by councils all around the country. So key takeaway, I guess, from us is that we see the role of Christchurch City Council being to consider the benefits of kickstarting a local hydrogen economy in order to do 3 things. One is to decarbonise hard-to-treat sectors within Canterbury's economy. The second one being to support ECAN in their hydrogen bus investigations. And the third one being to consider what assets Christchurch City Council has that are hard to electrify and explore the possibility of green hydrogen helping to decarbonise these assets, with examples being wastewater treatment plants, landfills, swimming pools, long range or heavy fleet. Kia ora, thank you.
Kia ora, thank you very much, and thanks for wrapping it up in that way at the end. I think that's a pretty crystal clear submission, so thank you very much. Thank you. The next one is David Fisher.
Where do I?
Oh, if you grab a seat at the table.
Okay.
Welcome. Thank you very much for being here.
Right. I was going to start with much hyperbole, but I'm sure you've heard all that many times already. But I would like to remind you that it's the politicians that are going to be remembered by the actions that are taken now. And that's a burden that you will have to bear. I've looked through the document many times, and the first things that I think need to be said are that over and over again in my notes I've written there's no indication of how this is to be done. There are no goals, no targets, no measurements. It's a very nice document. The marketers have obviously had a field day, but it doesn't really get us very far without targets. Hopefully we're not too late in starting this process, but again, you as politicians will be aware that there are going to be losers in the processes that will have to be played out in the next decade or so. And you will have to decide who those losers are. Now, some people can bear the loss greater than others. Some organisations can bear the loss greater than others. But what very often happens is it's the poor that are the losers. Now, if actions are taken now, then the level of loss will be reduced. But if things aren't done now, if targets aren't set, if goals aren't properly planned, then people sitting in these desks in 15 years' time will have to decide, well, we can't save Brighton and Sumner. Which one are we going to save? And what are we going to tell the people we can't save? And that's what will happen unless action is taken very soon. Now, I've got one or two problems with the document. It says net emissions target has been set for 2045, excluding methane. Well, then net zero emissions target has not been set.
We've come to the end of your time, so I just want you to
Oh, right, okay, sorry.
Really focus on. I mean, you've made some really strong, powerful points, and you've asked us to think about how we'll be remembered in the future, and I think that's a pretty powerful
All right,
statement.
I will be very briefly then. Will council entities be included in these proposals? Will people in the future are not going to accept the sophistry that, oh, it's not up to the council? I could go on for ages. I'm not going to. I've spoken too long.
No, look, you've given us a very detailed submission, and I think you're coming to the table and making that challenge to all of us has really added a real strength to what you've put in your detailed submission. So thank you very much for coming. Much appreciated. Next is Marie Gray, and you've got 2 submissions, so I don't know if you want to run them together or whether you want to start one and... Do you want to traverse
I'll give
them?
my personal submission first.
Okay, we'll do your first one, the 3-minute one first. Right, cool. Thank you.
O kia ora koutou, nei rā te mihi mai o hā kia koutou. So I'm here today on behalf of myself and my whānau. I've got my kids up the back, and it's actually my kids while I'm here today, because I think it's on all of us that actually this is not a nice to have. This is actually about leaving our children and our grandchildren with a habitable planet. And we responded to COVID-19 like it's an emergency, but actually climate change has been a slow-moving train wreck. And actually all of us have been way too slow to take action in this area. All of us, the central government, local government, us individuals have, I think, just hoped it would sort itself out. And actually we have to make significant change to how we live our life. So some key points. The programs of work have huge potential, but what we actually need to see is a detailed plan around each of those programs, and with urgency, because that's what we need to see to actually know whether we're going to meet the goals. So this is just kind of a first step. Rate rises. I am more than prepared to pay more in rates to tackle this crisis, because I do not want to see this burden onto my children. The long-term plan and annual plan process have to uphold the climate change strategy. And there are many elements of the long-term plan, which is a 10-year plan, which actually undermine the climate change strategy. And that's really worrying. An example of the Sustainability Fund and Biodiversity Fund being cut by 5% for 10 years. That fund should be like, I don't know, doubled, tripled, not cut. I also want to talk about cycleways. Now, Christchurch is leading the way in cycleways, actually, in terms of when you look at other cities. But the truth is actually what we currently have is not enough, and it's not fast enough. And I just urge you to be really courageous in the space of the cycleways. I know there's controversy. Like I read the comments on Facebook. And I know it's a really hard thing from a political point of view, but actually, if we want to get people out of their cars, we need safe, accessible cycleways. And we also need to connect the bus network and the cycleways. You know, I am constantly looking at how can I get from A to B without taking my car? And it is not easy. I'm actually saving for an e-bike because it is not easy to do. And working with ECAN on the bus routes and connecting them with cycleways will be critical. So in summary, I actually support the draft strategy. I think it's on the right track, but the devil is in the detail, and what we need to see is bold leadership from the council in this area.
Very good. Well, you've just summed that up in a perfect
3 minutes.
time frame.
I've had some experience with submissions.
Excellent. Well, you've done perfectly. Now you've got 5 minutes on behalf of the Summit Road Society.
Yeah. So kia ora. So this is on behalf of the Summit Road Society, which is a grassroots conservation organisation working to protect the Port Hills. And of course, the Summit Road Society has a particular interest in the Port Hills and Banks Peninsula, and some of the effects of climate change are being felt right now in terms of the Port Hills and Peninsula, especially around the risk of drought and wildfires. Ōtautahi Reserve, 80 hectares burnt in the Port Hills fires a couple of years ago. And there's also challenges around water and our fresh water supplies, and also restoration efforts, establishing a new bush when we have such dry conditions. So we support the goals, especially around the guardians of our natural environment, Goal 4, and support the proposed programs of work. And we fully endorse the key focus areas, protecting, restoring and increasing our Indigenous biodiversity across the city and peninsula, with a focus on our forests, our waterways, wetlands, coastal ecosystems and our urban trees. So while we actually think the climate change strategy is definitely on the right track, the real issue is going to be the actions on the ground and the associated resourcing to achieve this. And so we cannot afford to make slow incremental change if the climate change targets in the strategy are to be met. So the long-term plan and the annual plan process must work to support the objectives of the climate change strategy, not undermine it. This council has identified a next step of work in each program of work, and that's a good start, but what we need to see is the detailed plan for each program of work. And this must be done with urgency and in partnership with iwi and with the local community. And so we look forward to being part of that process ourselves. Ngā mihi.
Excellent. Questions? No? James.
Kia ora, Marie. You came in the other day with the Summit Road Society. You made a really good comment there, and I just would like you to flesh out. Can you just remind us of what you meant when you said something like, we don't owe them a debt, we want them to owe us a debt? Can you just remind me of what you were talking about?
Was that in the long-term plan submission?
Yeah. Or did you just make that up at the time?
I might have.
I wrote it down.
Yeah, but definitely. I think, I was just talking about with my friend today about the vision of Harry Au. When Harry Au created the Summit Road and the network of rest houses, he wasn't actually talking about a community connected by cars. Actually, that was the early 1900s. This was a network of rest houses so we could walk the Port Hills. We could walk to Banks Peninsula. And actually, I think some of the lessons of the past would inform us well today. That vision that people had to restore the Port Hills to provide for public access and to create connected pathways for people to move on their own 2 feet is actually the vision for the future.
Which is what came out of that was, you said, we don't owe them a debt, we want them to owe us a debt. Okay, that's what you said.
Wise words.
Sarah.
Thanks so much, Marie, and have fun with the e-bike.
Yes,
they're
I'm still
brilliant.
saving.
Yeah. And what's the capacity like for additional volunteers and planting and those kind of things if council puts in the resource needed to support that in the way of the park rangers and stuff?
Oh, I think that the capacity is amazing. I think you could easily get 50 people at planting events. Some of the bigger programs are planting, a few thousand trees in a day, definitely 1,000. So if you had but you need someone to organise it.
Yeah.
You need someone to kind of pull it together. So I think there's huge potential to actually build on our Indigenous biodiversity, but also our urban trees, which are really important for many other reasons.
Yeah.
So if you were able to support the urban ranger service by increasing that capacity, I think that there would be activity in nearly all the parks across the city.
Yeah.
Dunedin has that, and they've had it for like 3 years. Adopt a reserve.
Yes. Yeah. And the I've lost it now. Yep. Sorry, I've lost it. That's okay.
All good? Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation today. Thank you. Ross Gray, yes, from the Christchurch Civic Trust. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mayor Dalziel and councillors. I'm Ross Gray, representing the Christchurch Civic Trust, and we're going to be looking at three of the programs 5, 7, 8 and 9, with some comments which hopefully will endorse what has been written in the submission which you received some time ago. So the first one is trees, and we think it's important, in fact, to widen the focus from the indigenous species to take in exotics as well, to achieve the most rapid and economic carbon absorption possible. The figures that you've got in front of you on the full submission are provided by board member Mark Belton, who is a vastly experienced professional forester and ecologist, clearly show the advantages which exotics can offer over indigenous species in terms of CO2 mitigation. And there are all sorts of variables at play when those figures are compared, but I'm sure that Mark is correct in his statement there. While the great increase in native species planting in recent years is extremely heartening, I'm sure for everybody in Christchurch and around New Zealand, CCC must look at the climate change facts and adjust its sites to take in exotics as well. So the Christchurch Civic Trust, the Trust, is calling for a rational balance of planting types in Greater Christchurch. Public transport, Programme 7. My colleague on the board, Dr. Chris Kisling, who's currently the Chair Emeritus Professor of Transport Studies, has concisely and clearly drawn your attention to the dynamics involved in public transport as it applies to Christchurch. And here's a personal note here, in terms of the Trust, the pre-quakes free electric shuttle buses, those lovely yellow bubbly-nosed creatures, were in fact designed by David Thornley, the late David Thornley, who was a long-time board member of the Christchurch Civic Trust. And we feel that they should be reinstated as soon as possible, for obvious reasons. Post-quakes, there was a lost opportunity to utilise the available heavy rail network, that's to the west, south, and north, with potential huge energy savings and emissions reductions compared with motorway systems. As Dr. Kisling says, if a fraction of what's been put into motorways had been put into dealing with the possibilities of rail, then the savings in terms of climate change would already be considerable. Clear and decisive thinking about mass transport options is needed now, and we feel that there is an urgent need for some sort of transport central coordinating body which can deal with ECAN and CCC and can deal with rail and bus and so on issues. So lots to consider there, and no doubt money to be provided. Recycling, buildings and other, including green, programs 8 and 9. Currently, construction and demolition waste accounts for about 50% of landfill. This must be reduced. Recycling and upcycling of buildings is vital. As you will have heard perhaps often after the quakes, the greenest building is the one standing. This dictum was ignored by central government after the quakes, and the tally of 250 odd heritage buildings demolished, let alone over 1,000 non-heritage, is testament to that. However, the CCC can pat itself on the back. There's been an exemplary approach by it with dozens of restorations of its own heritage stock. So that's fantastic. The concept that I'm talking about is almost entirely lacking in the CCC draft climate change strategy. It's hinted at in Programme 8, but not dealt with specifically. 8% of the world's CO2 emissions are from cement manufacture. Demolition destroys embodied energy, results in heavy CO2 production. Timber construction must be encouraged and rewarded. And finally, the CCC 3 bins approach, we feel, has led the way, and really the word should be spread more and more nationally. Green waste potential problems with methane production need to be solved. The multi-truck collection system, can it be made less energy consuming and less CO2 emitting? Thank you.
Well, that is the 5 minutes.
That is the 5. Could I just, Madam Chair, just draw your attention to what I hope got to you all, and that is an attachment which I included with our written submission, and it's a 20-page attachment from the Civic Trust, initially to the Climate Change Commission, but sent your way because lots of the things apply to Christchurch. So I don't know if you got that or not.
When did you send that, Ross?
I sent it as part of the submission, and when it was due in by that particular date. In fact, it was a couple of days early, and it was attached to. It was an attachment to that email, and I had intended to check with people in charge here, but didn't get to it. So I'm not sure if you got it or not, but I'm very happy to send it if necessary. On the front page, folks, it's got the reference to Marion College, the building of the new Marion College in the old warehouse of Foodstuffs NZ. A good example of.
We will track it back. Okay, we'll track it back.
Thank you.
We'll make sure that all councillors get a copy of it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for raising it, because otherwise I wouldn't have known.
All right. Okay.
Thank you. Brian Hill.
I don't normally do this sort of thing, but when I read that document, it annoyed the hell out of me, to be perfectly honest. It just looks to me like an excuse to do a hell of a lot of nothing over a long period of time. When I was in business, if we wanted to achieve anything, you went for the low-hanging fruit. You looked at things that you could do, get results relatively quickly. And to me, you've got to be looking at the issue of transport. 57% or whatever of emissions are transport. That's where you've got to concentrate all your efforts. And while public transport and cycling may play a part, I recall several years ago there was a survey done, I can't remember whether it was a City Council or ECAN, where they asked people their opinions of various means of transport, and 80% of people said they would very unlikely or wouldn't use public transport or cycling as their main form of transport. People are wedded to their cars. They're always going to be, unless in the foreseeable future they're going to be. We need to encourage people to move to electric. The government's already signalled that it'll probably bring in some sort of subsidy thing for electric cars. We need to get into people's minds now, hey look, maybe I should buy an electric car next time. Countries where there's the biggest uptake of electric cars, the likes of Scandinavia, they have the most incentives for people to buy electric cars. I know in Scandinavia they get free use of ferries, they get free parking, they get free registration. Now, a lot of that obviously doesn't apply to Christchurch, but certainly free parking does. Use of bus lanes. Electric car, use the bus lane. Events like at Hagley Park or the Addington Arena have an area set up right by the door. If you've got an electric car, you can park there. It's just things to get into people's minds that, you know, maybe we should go electric. We talk about public transport, and often Amsterdam has talked about we should be aiming for Amsterdam. What we've got to remember is Amsterdam has 3 times as many people, so 3 times as many people to pay for it, and it's a third of the area. Even if you discount Banks Peninsula, it's a third of the urban area of Christchurch. That's why they have good public transport. Quite simply, we can't afford to have that sort of system. Lovely if we could, we can't afford it. And if I can very quickly, just the other point, we need to protect productive farmland. The likes of Hallswell, Marshland, beautiful farmland is now covered in houses. Steps have to be taken quickly. I recognise the government is perhaps going to make that difficult, and that making it difficult to zone land away from housing, but it's something that just has to be done.
Oh, the MPS on productive soils is still in the making, so I've got my fingers crossed. But in 1990, when I first ran for Parliament, the Greenbelt, protection of the Greenbelt was the #1 political issue on the agenda that was raised with me. And look what happened. Tragic. But I couldn't agree with you more, but thank you very much for your submission and also for acknowledging that central government national policy statements will play a big role in what we can and can't zone. So thank you very much. Thank you. Right, so that's the that is the some of the submitters for today, and very appreciative of everyone who has submitted. And I'm now going to adjourn the meeting to tomorrow at 1 p.m, Thursday the 20th of May, 1 p.m. Thank you very much.